And offer the call to the Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And it's no wonder that Labor members took themselves off this list, because they are embarrassed about this particular Labor 2013-14 budget savings measures No. 1 Bill 2014. They are indeed embarrassed, and they are embarrassed about the fact that they are holding up, through their obstructionist behaviour in the Senate, their own bills to actually help repair the budget situation. The member for Melbourne Ports did make a comment during the member for Ryan's excellent contribution to this debate, but I don't think it would have been recorded for Hansard's point of view. But I will record it because he voiced his objection about the Greens, and I will say the member for Melbourne Ports doesn't like the Greens. He probably is a little bit more in favour of them than I am as a Nationals member, but let me tell you, he knows full well just how obstructionist the Greens can be and just the agenda that they're running. So I will give the member for Melbourne Ports his due. He does have scant regard for the Greens and their social agenda, which is damaging to this nation. But this particular bill that we are debating tonight talks about Labor's 2013 budget policy of repealing the second round of carbon tax-related personal income tax cuts due to start on 1 July. Now, in opposition, we committed to keeping the first round of personal income tax and all the associated pension and benefit increases, and they have been retained. We said they would be prior to the September 2013 election, and indeed they have been retained. We've also delivered further savings to Australian households by removing the carbon tax itself. That's the carbon tax, that wonderful piece of public policy that the then Prime Minister Julia Gillard announced within months of being elected. I remember it well. We had the smiling, bearded member for Line standing behind her. I think he'd grown a beard to almost hide his appearance in public, because he was probably so embarrassed about the fact that the Labor also had to get the Greens vote. And we also had the member for New England, the independent member for New England, and Julia Gillard realised that she needed the support of the crossbenchers. She needed the support of the Greens to hold the numbers in the parliament. And I suppose you could say, fair enough, numbers is all what politics is about, and you can't govern if you don't have the necessary numbers. But you shouldn't govern if you have to almost sell your soul to achieve the Treasury benches. You shouldn't govern if what it means to actually have the numbers means that you have to give the independent crossbenchers or the Greens everything that they want. And that's what we saw after the 2010 election. That's what we saw in early 2011 when Julia Gillard stood there at that infamous press conference and announced that there would be a carbon tax after she so famously said there will be no carbon tax under the government I lead. But the removal of the carbon tax is saving the typical Australian family $550 a year, and that's a significant saving. We all know that the typical Australian family, indeed any Australian family, is under cost of living pressures with maintaining family budgets, and it's not easy. And $550 is a big saving. But we know what Labor's going to do if Labor does get re-elected next year, and that will be they will introduce the clean energy carbon tax, call it what you will. They will reintroduce that legislation. Goodness knows we don't need that. What this bill is doing is implementing a measure first announced by the Labor Party. Now, in the member for Lily's final budget, thank goodness it was his final budget, but when he handed it down on 14 May 2013, the former government deferred a second round of personal income tax. And that resulted in $1.5 billion worth of saving over the then forward estimates. Now, due to the addition of 2 further years to the forward estimates since then, the measure is now worth $2.8 billion. I'll repeat that, $2.8 billion to the budget over the next 4 years. Now, the former government, the Labor government, never bothered to legislate this May 2013 budget measure, never bothered to legislate it. This was just one of 100 announced but unimplemented taxation measures left to us by Labor. It was like, as the Treasurer announced today, time bombs left in the cupboard for us to, when we opened them, there they were. Upon coming to government, we attempted to legislate this Labor measure as a matter of urgency. We had to do it because we did have a crisis. We had a crisis of confidence in business. We had a budget emergency. There was so much despair and gloom about the situation that we were left. We all know cumulative deficits as far as the eye could see, projected debt $667 billion if we didn't act. And as such, this measure was introduced to the parliament twice under the Clean Energy, Income Tax Rates and Other Amendments Bill 2013 as part of the package of carbon tax repeal bills. However, Labor have now voted twice against this particular legislation, which implements this budget repair measure without outlining an alternative plan for it. And that's the trouble we find with Labor. Even in the budget in reply speech delivered by the member for Maribyrnong, the would-be Prime Minister, if he could be, not will be member for Melbourne Ports, God forbid, would be if he could be, hopefully never will be. Surely the Australian public are smarter than that. But in his budget in reply speech this year, the debt just blew out and out and out. And we heard the Treasurer in question time today mention the fact that for every minute that the opposition leader stood and delivered that budget in reply speech, it cost this nation, if it were to be implemented, another $200 million. Thank goodness no one from Labor's side called for an extension of time. $200 million a minute. I mean, that's just extraordinary, but without any possible way of saying, well, this is how we'll pay for it. This is what we will do if we are elected to govern this great nation. This is what we will do. These are the savings that we will implement to actually pay for it. And this is not the first time Labor has opposed its own budget repair measures. In addition to standing in the way of this $2.8 billion budget repair measure, Labor is also standing in the way of other policies that it itself announced but is now refusing to vote for. Labor measures that Labor now opposes total, racked up now, $6.5 billion. And you can look through the list. There's this particular $2.8 billion budget repair measure, the change of Labor's student start-up scholarships provided as a grant to a loan repayable through HECS. That was a $2.1 billion savings measure. The abolition of the discount for paying HECS fees up front, a $336 million savings measure. The change to apply an efficiency dividend to university funding, another $1.2 billion savings measure, and they all add up. But the trouble is, Labor couldn't manage the country properly in the 6 years from 2007 to 2013 when in government. They couldn't manage government. They certainly couldn't manage money. And we all know of Labor's absolute fiscal ineptitude when it came to making sure that the economy was ticking along nicely, that debts were being repaid. And what did Labor leave us? They left us with $133 million a day over and above what we could afford to pay. So every day when Australians go out to work, and every day when we're trying to run the economy, we're trying to pay our debts, we've got balance of payments figures, but we're under Labor, $133 million a day over and above what we should be. And we've got that down to $96 million a day now. It's way too high. It's way, way too high. But we're getting it under control because of sensible, measured, responsible Treasury by Joe Hockey, by the member for North Sydney. Now, when questioned why the Labor Party is now opposing its own savings, the member for Maribyrnong's only response was, "We're the Labor Party." I mean, what sort of response? Chris Shulman on ABC AM, 17 July 2014. Chris Shulman asked, and we'll get to that, but why won't you even back your own cuts? And Bill Shorten, the member for Maribyrnong, says, "Chris, we're the Labor Party." I mean, what sort of response is that to a question? How are you going to pay for it? We're the Labor Party. I mean, seriously, these savings now form part of the $58.6 billion black hole of the Labor Party. $58.6 billion. It's just extraordinary. Now, we have to get on with the job of repairing the budget, and that's what good, Liberal national governments do. We come in, we did it in 1996, and I can remember Kay Hull, my predecessor, often telling me, she was elected in 1998, and she often said to me the hardship and heartache that even 2 years in to government, and she was elected, as I say, in 1998, but the hardship and heartache that the Howard government in its early years suffered as a result of trying to repay the mess, trying to fix up the mess that Labor left it. And it did, with prudent fiscal management by John Howard, by Peter Costello, by the National Party leaders at the time, Tim Fischer and John Anderson and later Mark Vaile, fixed up the mess that Labor left, restored confidence back into regional Australia, and did all the sorts of things that the people expect Liberal national governments to do. And again, in September 2013, the Australian public tasked us with that very important job, once again, of fixing up the mess left by the Rudd-Gillard-Rudd years. But what do we get? What do we get? We just get baseless accusations in this place. We get measures of distraction, mass distraction in this place from those opposite. And then when it goes to the Senate, again, obstructionism. Again, we get held up. Again, Labor won't even pass its own budget savings measure, and I say shame on them. Our budget is about building a stronger economy, and that's what we saw when the Treasurer, Mr Hockey, announced his 2015-16 budget. And while Labor is distracted about all things which aren't getting on with the job of creating prosperity, aren't about generating new jobs, aren't about fixing our balance of payments, aren't about increasing hope and reward and opportunity and investment, we're getting on with the task of building a strong and prosperous nation. The focus of the Abbott Truss coalition government is on a passage on a credible path back to surplus. Now, it's not going to happen next year. It's not going to happen the year after. We're not going to stand here, and Joe Hockey certainly is more sensible than to stand here and promise, the 4 years of surpluses which I announced tonight, as the member for Lilley so mischievously did. He's not about to lead people to mislead people to say that the surpluses that he was going to announce tonight, because he knows that it's going to be a tough job. He knows it's going to be a tough task. But jobs are now growing at well over 3 times the pace under Labor. 3 times. The coalition government's budget cuts the small business company tax rate to the lowest in almost 50 years, since 1967, bringing it down from 30% down to by 1.5%. And all around the Riverina region that I represent, that's really being welcomed. On the way home last Friday, I pulled up along the Sturt Highway, and Roger Morton, a mate of mine, was fixing a fence, and I pulled up. I walked across and I chatted to him. He was repairing his fence, and I said, you know that you can. I did actually. I held the barbed wire whilst he was straining it, and he was grateful for that. But he was even more grateful, Member for Ports, for the fact that under the budget announced by Joe Hockey, that he will be able to replace that full fence for his cattle farm with a new fence, and there'll be an instant asset write-off for that. And that's great. And of course, companies are going to be able to do it for $20,000 worth of equipment, and that has really gone down well. I've got to say that after the 2014 budget, it was tough work going out into the supermarkets and going out to sporting events and community events, which I attend all the time, because people said that, gee, the budget's tough, and it was necessarily tough. But this year's budget does provide hope for business. We know that small business is the engine room of the economy. We know that we're going to get a jobs boost and an economic boost from those small businesses, which are the lifeblood of particularly regional Australia, but indeed the whole nation. And we know that Labor failed. We know that because we see it on so many fronts. We're getting on with the job of fixing up the mess that we inherited. The member for Melbourne Ports knows that there was a problem when we took over government, and we will get on with the job of fixing it, because that's what good, responsible, measured and fair Liberal national governments always do. Thank you, Deputy Speaker.